When Fatima walked into the gleaming marble foyer of the Al-Mansouri mansion in Dubai for the first time, she never imagined that cleaning this house would lead her to uncover a secret so profound it would shake a billionaire's empire to its core. What started as a desperate search for work became a journey that would expose hidden truths, challenge everything she believed about loyalty, and ultimately force her to make a choice that would change not just her life, but the lives of countless others. The secret she discovered wasn't just personal, it was dangerous, and what she chose to do with that knowledge would either destroy her or set her free. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The scorching Dubai sun had already begun its relentless assault on the city by 6 a.m. when Fatima Okonkwo stepped off the cramped bus that had carried her from the workers' quarters in Sonapur to the pristine neighborhoods of Emirates Hills. Her worn canvas bag contained everything that mattered: her passport, a thermos of lukewarm tea, and a crumpled piece of paper with an address that represented her last hope. 3 months. That's how long she had been in Dubai, and 3 months was exactly how long her savings had lasted. The recruitment agency, back in Lagos, had painted a different picture. Good wages, comfortable accommodation, families who treated their help with respect. The reality had been a series of short-term positions with families who either couldn't afford to keep her or found fault with her work for reasons she suspected had nothing to do with her cleaning abilities. Fatima wasn't new to hard work. Back in Nigeria, she had managed her late mother's small restaurant while putting herself through 2 years of business school before financial constraints forced her to drop out. She could balance books, manage inventory, and handle difficult customers with grace. But none of that mattered here, where her college education was invisible and her accent marked her as just another domestic worker from Africa. The Al-Mansouri residence stood like a fortress of glass and marble behind imposing iron gates. Even from the street, Fatima could see the perfectly manicured gardens, the fountain that sparkled in the morning light, and the collection of luxury cars parked in a circular driveway. This wasn't just wealth. This was the kind of generational fortune that built cities and toppled governments. She pressed the intercom button with trembling fingers, her heart hammering against her ribs. This interview had come through Amara, a fellow Nigerian who worked for a family 3 streets away. "Mrs. Al-Mansouri is different," Amara had whispered during their chance meeting at the local market. "She's Lebanese, married into the family 20 years ago. She understands what it's like to be an outsider, but there's something about that house, Fatima, something that makes the other staff nervous. Good pay, though, better than anywhere else." The gates buzzed open, and Fatima walked up the winding stone path, her reflection multiplying in the floor-to-ceiling windows that lined the mansion's facade. A uniformed security guard nodded at her from his post, speaking rapidly into a radio. In Arabic, everything here operated with military precision. The front door opened before she could knock, revealing a petite woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in an elegant bun. This had to be Mrs. Al-Mansouri, Layla, as she had introduced herself over the phone in accented English that carried traces of Beirut. "Fatima, welcome. Please, come in." Layla's voice was warm, but there was something guarded about her posture, as if she were constantly looking over her shoulder. "We can talk in my private sitting room." The interior of the house was breathtaking in its opulence, but it felt strangely empty, despite being filled with priceless art and furniture. There, footsteps echoed off marble floors as they passed through rooms that looked more like museum exhibits than lived-in spaces. Fatima noticed the absence of family photographs, the way certain doors remained firmly closed, and how their route carefully avoided the grand staircase that curved up to the second floor. Layla's sitting room was different from the rest of the House smaller, warmer, with books in both Arabic and English lining the walls, and family photos clustered on a side table. Here finally were glimpses of a real life. A younger Layla laughing at what appeared to be a wedding, children's drawings stuck to a bulletin board, and a single red rose in a simple glass vase. "Please sit," Layla said, gesturing to a comfortable armchair. "Would you like some tea?" As they settled into conversation, Fatima found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. Layla asked about her background, her family, her education, not just her work experience. She seemed genuinely interested in Fatima as a person, not just as hired help. "The position involves more than just cleaning," Layla explained, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "The house is large, as you can see, and my husband, he values privacy above all else. There are certain areas that require special attention, certain rooms that must be maintained exactly as they are, and absolute discretion is essential." Fatima nodded, though something in Layla's tone made her stomach tighten slightly. "I understand completely, Ma'am. I've worked for prominent families before." "This is different," Layla said quietly, glancing toward the closed door of the sitting room. "My husband is Khalil Al-Mansouri. Perhaps you've heard the name." Fatima's breath caught. Everyone who followed international business news knew that a name, Khalil Al-Mansouri, was one of the most powerful men in the Middle East, with interests spanning oil, technology, and real estate across 3 continents. His face had graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune magazines, always wearing the same enigmatic smile that revealed nothing and promised everything. "He's very particular about his privacy," Layla continued. "There are aspects of our life here that must remain confidential. The salary I mentioned on the phone reflects not just the work involved, but the level of discretion required." The salary had been generous, more than Fatima had ever earned, enough to send money home to her younger brother's school fees and still save for her own future. But now she understood why. This wasn't just about cleaning floors and dusting furniture. This was about becoming a keeper of secrets. "What kind of discretion?" Fatima asked carefully. Layla was quiet for a long moment, her fingers toying with the wedding ring on her left hand. "My husband works from home frequently. He has meetings, business calls, visitors who come at odd hours. You would need to work around his schedule, maintain certain areas without disturbing his routine, and, well, you would inevitably overhear and observe things that are not your concern." The weight of the unspoken settled between them. Fatima thought of her dwindling bank account, the dismissive treatment from her last employer who had let her go because she didn't fit the family's aesthetic, and the growing desperation she felt each night as she calculated how many more weeks she could survive in Dubai. "I understand," she said finally. Complete discretion. Relief flickered across Layla's face. "Good. There's one more thing. My husband doesn't know I'm hiring someone new. He prefers to remain uninvolved in household management. You'll report directly to me. Take instructions only from me, and if you encounter him in the house, you should be respectful but invisible. Can you do that?" Fatima nodded, though the arrangement struck her as odd. In her experience, wealthy men typically wanted to approve anyone who would have access to their homes. But perhaps this was just another facet of the Al-Mansouri family's complexity. "Excellent. You can start tomorrow. I'll show you to the staff quarters. There's a comfortable room in the West Wing. And Fatima." Layla's voice took on a tone of gentle warning. "This house has many stories, many secrets. Your job is to clean around them, not to uncover them. Some things are better left undisturbed." As Fatima followed Layla through the mansion's gleaming corridors toward her new quarters, she had no idea that within 48 hours she would stumble upon a discovery that would make her question everything she thought she knew about loyalty, justice, and the price of silence. The secret she was about to uncover wasn't just big, it was dangerous enough to topple empires and destroy lives, and soon she would have to decide whether some secrets were worth keeping, or if the truth was worth risking everything she had. Worked so hard to build. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Fatima's new quarters were more luxurious than any place she had ever lived. The staff wing room came complete with its own bathroom, a small kitchenette, and a window that overlooked the mansion's pool area. But luxury felt hollow when wrapped in isolation. For her first 3 days, she saw no one except Layla, who appeared each morning with a detailed list of tasks and disappeared again like smoke. The house operated on invisible schedules. Fatima learned to recognize the sounds. The soft hum of the elevator that served the upper floors, the purr of expensive cars arriving and departing at unpredictable hours, and most notably, the complete silence that descended over certain sections of the mansion during what Layla called business hours. Her daily routine began at dawn. The ground floor required meticulous attention, marble surfaces that showed every fingerprint, Persian rugs worth more than most people's annual salaries, and art pieces that she handled with gloved hands and held breath. The dining room table could seat 20, yet showed no signs of ever hosting a meal. The library contained thousands of books in multiple languages, but their spines remained uncracked, their pages unturned. It was the locked rooms that began to occupy her thoughts. On the ground floor alone, she counted 6 doors that remained, permanently closed. When she asked Layla about them, the woman's response was always the same. Mr. Al-Mansouri's private offices. They have their own cleaning service. But Fatima had been in Dubai long enough to recognize the cleaning crews that serviced wealthy neighborhoods. She knew their schedules, their uniforms, their methods. No such crew ever entered the Al-Mansouri mansion. By her 4th day, Fatima had developed a mental map of the house's rhythms. Khalil Al-Mansouri was an early riser. She could hear movement from the master suite above by 5 a.m. He spent his mornings in the East Wing, in rooms she wasn't permitted to enter. Lunch was delivered to his private quarters by Layla herself, carried on silver trays that returned empty but untouched looking, as if the meals were mere props in an elaborate theater. The afternoons brought visitors. Fatima would be instructed to remain in the staff wing during these times, but sound traveled strangely through the mansion's marble corridors. She began to recognize voices, men speaking in rapid Arabic, others in accented English, and occasionally conversations in languages she couldn't identify. The meetings never lasted long, but they left the house feeling different afterward, charged with an electric tension that lingered in the air like ozone before a storm. It was on Friday, her 5th day, that Fatima first encountered the man himself. She had been working in the main salon, carefully dusting the crystal chandelier that dominated the room's center, when she heard the elevator's soft chime. Footsteps approached on the marble, measured, confident, expensive shoes, striking stone with the rhythm of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Fatima immediately moved to make herself invisible, as Layla had instructed. She positioned herself behind the chandelier's massive frame, continuing her work while trying to blend into the background. But invisibility, she discovered, was a two-way street. From her vantage point, she could observe without being observed. Khalil Al-Mansouri was smaller than she had expected from the magazine photographs, but he carried himself with the kind of authority that filled any room he entered. His hair was silver at the temples, his beard meticulously groomed, his clothes tailored to perfection, but it was his eyes that struck her, dark, intelligent, and carrying a weight that suggested sleepless nights and difficult decisions. He wasn't alone. A younger man walked beside him, European by appearance, carrying a leather briefcase and speaking in urgent, hushed tones. They settled into the salon's seating area, their conversation continuing in English, perhaps for the visitors' benefit, or perhaps because what they were discussing required the precision that came with speaking in one's second language. "The shipment from Marseille has been delayed," the younger man was saying, consulting papers from his briefcase. "Customs is asking more questions than usual. Our contact suggests they may have been tipped off." Khalil's response was measured. "Oh, calm. Switch to the Rotterdam route. Notify our partners that we're implementing Protocol 7. That will cost us 3 weeks minimum, possibly more. Better than losing everything." Khalil's voice carried the weight of a man who had faced such decisions before. "What's the status on the African operations?" Fatima's breath caught. African operations. Her hands stilled on the crystal, straining to hear more clearly. "Lagos is secure, but the Johannesburg connection is requesting additional guarantees. They're concerned about the new government's anti-corruption initiatives. Double their percentage. Fear makes people expensive, but it also makes them reliable." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, touching on locations across 3 continents, using code words that Fatima couldn't decipher but instinctively understood were significant. When they finally departed, heading toward the locked east wing, Fatima remained frozen in place for several minutes, her mind racing. This wasn't just business talk. The careful language, the coded references, the obvious concern about government interference. Everything pointed to activities that existed in the shadows of legitimate commerce. But what kind of activities? And what did they have to do with Africa, with her homeland? That evening, as she prepared for bed in her comfortable quarters, Fatima found herself staring at her phone. She had promised her brother Emeka that she would call regularly, but lately their conversations had grown strained. How could she explain that she was living in unprecedented luxury while working for a man whose business dealings made her increasingly uncomfortable? She thought about her mother, who had always taught her that everyone deserved the benefit of the doubt. "People are complicated, Fatima," she used to say while preparing meals for customers who often couldn't pay. "We see only pieces of their lives, never the whole picture." But some pieces, Fatima was beginning to realize, revealed more than others. The weekend brought a different rhythm to the house. Layla seemed more relaxed, appearing in casual clothes instead of her usual formal attire. She spent time in the garden, tending to plants with the careful attention of someone who found peace in growing things. It was during one of these moments that Fatima worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her. "Mrs. Al-Mansouri, may I ask how long you've lived here?" Layla looked up from the roses she was pruning, her expression thoughtful. 22 years in Dubai. Before that, we lived in Lebanon for the first few years of our marriage. Do you have children?" Something shifted in Layla's face, a shadow that passed quickly, but not quickly enough to escape notice. "We had a daughter. She's no longer with us." The weight of that statement settled between them. Fatima wanted to express sympathy, but something in Layla's posture warned against pursuing the topic. Instead, she continued with her assigned tasks, but a new understanding began to form. The empty rooms, the formal dining table that never hosted meals, the careful isolation of the house, all of it suddenly made sense as the architecture of grief. But grief, Fatima knew from her own experience, couldn't explain everything. The late-night meetings, the coded conversations, the obvious anxiety that surrounded Khalil's business dealings, these pointed to complications that extended far beyond personal loss. Sunday brought an unexpected development. Fatima was working in the main library when she heard voices approaching, Khalil and another man, their conversation animated in a way that suggested disagreement. "The situation in Nigeria is becoming untenable," the visitor was saying in heavily accented English. "The new president is not as cooperative as his predecessor." Our usual methods of persuasion are proving insufficient. Then we adapt, Khalil replied. 20 years in this business has taught me that governments change, but human nature remains constant. Everyone has a price, and everyone has pressure points. And if the pressure points prove ineffective? There was a pause before Khalil answered, and when he did, his voice carried a coldness that made Fatima's skin crawl. Then we remind them what happened to the journalist in Lagos who asked too many questions about mineral rights. Sometimes the most effective persuasion requires no words at all. Fatima's blood turned to ice. She knew about that journalist, Samuel Okafor, an investigative reporter who had been exposing corruption in Nigeria's mining industry before his car exploded in a Lagos street 3 months ago. The incident had been ruled a terrorist attack, but many suspected it was something far more targeted. The conversation moved past the library, but Fatima remained frozen, her mind reeling. She was no longer just overhearing business discussions. She was listening to casual references to murder, to the kind of power that could reach across continents to silence inconvenient voices. That night, alone in her quarters, Fatima stared at the ceiling and tried to process what she had learned. She was working for a man who was not just wealthy, but dangerous. A man whose business interests apparently included silencing journalists who asked the wrong questions about African mineral rights. The comfortable bed, the generous salary, the respectful treatment from Layla, all of it was built on a foundation of violence and corruption that stretched from Dubai's gleaming towers to the streets of her homeland. But knowing and proving were different things entirely. And even if she could prove what she had heard, who would believe a domestic worker's word against one of the most powerful men in the Middle East? As sleep finally claimed her, Fatima's dreams were filled with images of locked doors and the weight of secrets that grew heavier with each passing day. She had wanted this job to change her life, and it was, just not in the way she had imagined. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new opportunities to observe, and new pieces of a puzzle that was revealing itself to be far more sinister than she had ever anticipated. The question that haunted her as consciousness faded was simple but terrifying. What would she do with the knowledge she was accumulating? And how much more could she learn before the secrets she was uncovering became too dangerous to keep? Week 2 brought a shift in the mansion's atmosphere that Fatima couldn't quite identify. Khalil's meetings became more frequent and more urgent. She could feel the tension radiating from the east wing like heat from a furnace, and Layla's calm demeanor began showing cracks of anxiety that no amount of carefully applied makeup could hide. It was Tuesday morning when everything changed. Fatima had been assigned to deep clean the formal living room on the 2nd floor, a space she had never accessed before. Layla handed her the key with trembling fingers, her usual composed. Instructions replaced by nervous energy. "This room hasn't been used in years," Layla explained, avoiding eye contact. "Just dust everything carefully and don't move anything from its place. I'll be out for most of the day, a medical appointment in the city." The 2nd floor felt different from the rest of the house. While the ground level maintained an illusion of warmth despite its emptiness, the upper level carried an oppressive weight, as if the very air held memories too heavy to release. Family portraits lined the hallway, formal poses of Khalil and Layla from their younger years, vacation photos from exotic locations, and images of a beautiful young girl with Layla's eyes and Khalil's determined chin. The formal living room was a shrine to suspended time. Furniture covered in white sheets stood like ghosts in the filtered sunlight. But it was the desk in the corner that drew Fatima's attention, an antique piece that seemed oddly out of place among the modern furnishings. As she carefully dusted its surface, her cleaning cloth caught on a small handle she hadn't noticed. The desk had a secret compartment, and her gentle pressure had triggered its mechanism. A hidden drawer slid open with a soft click that seemed to echo through the silent room. Inside were documents, files thick with papers, photographs, and what appeared to be official correspondence. Fatima's first instinct was to close the drawer immediately and pretend she had never seen it, but the letterhead on the top document made her freeze. UNICEF, United Nations Children's Fund. Her hands shaking, she lifted the document to read more clearly. It was a report dated 3 years earlier, detailing humanitarian efforts in several African countries, including Nigeria. But these weren't typical charity documents. These were investigation reports, witness statements, and most disturbing of all, financial records that showed massive amounts of money being diverted from children's aid programs. The photographs beneath the documents told an even more horrifying story. Images of mining operations in rural Nigeria, children as young as 8 working in dangerous conditions, and what appeared to be mass graves near mining sites. Each photo was stamped with locations and dates, creating a chronological record of systematic exploitation. But it was the final document in the stack that made Fatima's world tilt on its axis. A medical examiner's report from Lagos, dated 8 months earlier, bearing the name Amara Al-Mansouri, age 19, cause of death, gunshot wound to the chest. Amara Al-Mansouri, Khalil and Layla's daughter, hadn't simply died, she had been murdered. And according to the report, she had been working undercover for an international human rights organization investigating illegal mining operations that were using child labor and environmental destruction to extract rare earth minerals, the same operations that Khalil's business empire was financing. Fatima's mind reeled as the pieces fell into place. Amara had discovered her own father's involvement in the exploitation she was investigating. The report included a USB drive inventory that mentioned extensive documentation of financial transfers between Al-Mansouri Industries and mining cartels in West Africa, including evidence of government bribery and the systematic use of child labor. At the bottom of the medical examiner's report was a handwritten note: personal effects missing from scene. USB drive mentioned in victim's final communication to supervisor was not recovered. Fatima sat back in the desk chair, her whole body trembling. Khalil's own daughter had been killed because she was about to expose his crimes, and somehow these documents had ended up hidden in a secret compartment in the family home. Had Amara hidden them here? Had someone else placed them here for safekeeping? The sound of a car door slamming in the driveway below made her heart stop. Layla had said she would be gone for most of the day, but voices were approaching the house. Male voices, speaking in the urgent tones she had learned to associate with Khalil's business meetings. Working with desperate efficiency, Fatima photographed every document with her phone, her hands shaking so badly she had to retake several shots. The photographs, the reports, the medical examiner's findings, everything went into her phone's memory. When she heard footsteps on the marble stairs below, she quickly returned the documents to their hiding place and triggered the drawer to close. But she had kept one item, a small notebook that had been tucked beneath the photos. It was filled with handwriting in English and Arabic, what appeared to be Amara's personal investigation notes, names, dates, locations, and most importantly, a detailed plan for exposing what she called the network, a web of corruption stretching from Dubai to multiple African countries, facilitated by her father's business connections. The footsteps were getting closer. Fatima slipped the notebook into her cleaning supplies bucket beneath the bottles of polish and dust cloths and resumed her assigned tasks with forced calm. When Khalil appeared in the doorway moments later, accompanied by 2 men she didn't recognize, she was carefully dusting a lampshade with the mechanical precision of someone completely absorbed in routine work. "Why is someone cleaning in here?" Khalil's voice carried a dangerous edge that made the temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees. "Mrs. Al-Mansouri's instructions, sir," Fatima replied without looking up, maintaining the invisible servant persona that had served her well. "She said this room needed attention." One of the men whispered something to Khalil in Arabic. His response was sharp, dismissive, but Fatima caught enough to understand that they were discussing whether her presence was a security risk. The conversation shifted to English, apparently for the benefit of the third man. "The Nigerian situation requires immediate resolution," the stranger was saying. "The new government is proving less cooperative than anticipated, and there are rumors that someone has been feeding information to international investigators." "That's impossible," Khalil replied. "The only person who had access to sensitive information is dead. Perhaps, but the investigation into the mining operations is gaining momentum. Someone in Lagos has been asking questions about your daughter's death, connecting it to her human rights work." Fatima's blood turned to ice. They were talking about Amara, about her murder, with the casual indifference of discussing weather patterns. "Handle it," Khalil said simply. "Use the same methods as before, and ensure that this time there are no surviving witnesses or documentation." The men continued their discussion as they moved toward the room's far window, their voices dropping to levels that made eavesdropping impossible. But Fatima had heard enough. They weren't just covering up past crimes, they were planning new. When the group finally left the room, Fatima remained frozen in place for several minutes, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. She wasn't just working for a criminal, she was working for a man who had orchestrated his own daughter's murder to protect his empire built on child exploitation. The notebook in her cleaning bucket felt like it was burning through the plastic. Amara's final investigation, the evidence she had died trying to expose, was now in Fatima's possession. But what could she do with it? Who could she trust with information this dangerous? As she mechanically finished her cleaning tasks, one phrase from Amara's notebook kept echoing in her mind. "They kill to keep their secrets. The only protection is to make the truth too public to silence." That afternoon, alone in her quarters, Fatima spread Amara's notebook across her small table and began to read. The young woman's investigation was meticulous, documenting not just Khalil's crimes, but an entire network of corruption that reached into government offices, international organizations, and humanitarian groups across Africa. But it was the final entry that made Fatima's decision for her, written in Amara's careful handwriting, dated just 3 days before her death. "I know I'm running out of time. Father has realized what I'm investigating, and his business partners are getting nervous. If something happens to me, I've hidden copies of everything in the house, places he would never think to look. Someone, someday, will find the truth. And when they do, I hope they have the courage to finish what I started. The children in those mines deserve someone to fight for them, even if I can't be there to see justice done." Fatima closed the notebook and picked up her phone. Her hands were steady now, her decision made. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Her former professor from business school, Dr. Adaora Nkem, who now worked for Transparency International in London. She began typing a message. "Professor, I need to speak with you urgently about a story that needs to be told. It's about children, justice, and the courage to do what's right even when it's dangerous." As she pressed send, Fatima realized that her life had just taken an irreversible turn. She was no longer just a maid who had accidentally overheard secrets. She was now the keeper of evidence that could topple empires and save lives. And tomorrow she would have to begin the most dangerous performance of her life, pretending to be the same invisible servant while secretly working to expose the monster she served. The question that haunted her as night fell over Dubai was, whether she could stay alive long enough to finish what Amara had started, or if she would become another accident in Khalil Al-Mansouri's long history of silencing inconvenient truths. Dr. Adara Nakem's response came at 3 a.m. Dubai time, waking Fatima from restless sleep, filled with nightmares of mining pits and faceless children. The message was brief but urgent. Video call me in 1 hour. Use Signal app. Delete this conversation after. Fatima's heart hammered as she installed the encrypted messaging app and waited for the appointed time. When her former professor's face appeared on the small screen, the years seemed to melt away. The same intelligent eyes, the same graying natural hair, but now carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much of the world's darkness. "Fatima, you look terrified," Dr. Nkem said without preamble. "Tell me everything." For the next 40 minutes, Fatima laid out her discovery in careful detail, sharing the photographs she had taken of the documents and reading directly from Amara's notebook. Dr. Nkem's expression grew increasingly grave as the scope of the evidence became clear. "This is bigger than anything we've investigated before," her professor said finally. "If these documents are authentic, and they appear to be, you've uncovered a systematic operation that's been stealing millions from Children's Aid, while forcing those same children into slave labor. But Fatima, you need to understand something. The man you're working for has killed to protect these secrets. Your life is in immediate danger." "I know," Fatima whispered, "but I can't just pretend. I never saw this. Those children in the photographs, they look like my brother did at that age." Dr. Nkem was quiet for a moment, then leaned closer to her camera. "There's something you need to know. We've been investigating rumors about mining operations in Nigeria for months, but we've never been able to get concrete evidence. 3 journalists have died attempting to expose this network. Your employer's daughter would have been our breakthrough witness, but her own father had her killed." Fatima finished. "We believe so, though we could never prove it. What you found, Amara's personal investigation, the financial documents, the photographic evidence, this could finally bring justice not just for her, but for thousands of children." They spent the next 20 minutes developing a plan. Dr. Nkem would coordinate with international investigators and human rights organizations to prepare for the evidence release. But first, they needed more. Amara's notebook mentioned additional hidden documents throughout the house, and there were references to scheduled meetings that could provide real-time evidence of ongoing crimes. "You'll need to maintain your cover while gathering everything." "You can," Dr. Nkem explained, "but at the first sign that your safety is compromised, you extract immediately. We have safe houses in Dubai and protocols for protecting witnesses. How long do I have?" "Days, maybe a week. Once we begin the legal proceedings, Al-Mansouri will know someone inside his organization has betrayed him. He'll start eliminating potential sources." After ending the call and meticulously deleting all traces of the conversation, Fatima lay awake until dawn, Amara's notebook pressed against her chest. Somewhere in Nigeria, children were waking up to another day of forced labor while their supposed aid money lined the pockets of men like Khalil Al-Mansouri. The weight of their suffering, combined with Amara's final plea for justice, gave her the courage she needed for what lay ahead. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Layla appeared at breakfast looking drawn and exhausted, her usual composure replaced by barely contained anxiety. "Fatima, I need to ask you for a special favor," she said, wrapping her hands around a cup of tea that remained untouched. "My husband is hosting a very important dinner tonight. Government officials, business partners from several countries. I need everything to be perfect." This was the opportunity Fatima had been hoping for. Large gatherings meant multiple conversations, potential access to restricted areas while guests were distracted, and the possibility of overhearing information that could corroborate Amara's evidence. "Of course, Mrs. Al-Mansouri. What would you like me to do?" "The dining room needs to be prepared for 12 guests. Use the formal china, the crystal glasses, the silver service, and—" Layla hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You'll need to serve during the meal. Our usual staff has called in sick." Fatima's pulse quickened. Serving dinner meant being present during conversations that were normally held behind locked doors. "I'm honored by your trust, ma'am." "There's one more thing," Layla continued, her eyes darting toward the closed doors that led to Khalil's private wing. "Some of the guests tonight are dangerous men. If you hear things that frighten you, if conversations become threatening, you must pretend you understand nothing. Your life may depend on it." The warning was clear. Layla knew exactly what kind of business her husband conducted, and she was genuinely concerned for Fatima's safety. It was the first crack in the facade of willful ignorance that Layla had maintained. The day passed in careful preparation. As Fatima polished silver and arranged flowers, she mentally rehearsed her plan. She would serve with professional invisibility while memorizing every word spoken. Amara's notebook had mentioned a scheduled meeting about Phase 3 of the African operations. Tonight could be that meeting. At 6 p.m., guests began arriving in a procession of luxury vehicles. Fatima observed from the kitchen window as men in expensive suits emerged from cars bearing diplomatic plates. She recognized two faces from news broadcasts, a Nigerian government official who had been prominently featured in anti-corruption campaigns, and a Lebanese businessman who owned mining interests across West Africa. The irony was bitter. Men who publicly championed children's rights were about to sit down to dinner with the man who profited from their exploitation. At 7:30, Fatima began serving the first course, moving through the dining room with practiced efficiency. The conversation was initially mundane: business pleasantries, discussion of market conditions, complaints about regulatory oversight. But as wine flowed and comfort levels rose, the talk shifted to more sensitive matters. "The Lagos operation needs to be expanded," the Nigerian official was saying, cutting into his lamb with silver utensils that probably cost more than most Nigerian families earned in a year. "But the new mining minister is asking uncomfortable questions about safety protocols." "Safety protocols are expensive," Khalil replied calmly. "Perhaps the minister needs a reminder about the benefits of cooperation." As Fatima refilled glasses, she caught the eye of the Lebanese businessman. There was something predatory in his gaze that made her skin crawl, but she maintained her servile demeanor and continued her duties. "What about the journalist situation?" another guest asked. "I heard there's been renewed interest in the mining deaths." "Handled," Khalil said simply. "The investigation has been redirected toward environmental concerns rather than labor practices, much less politically sensitive, and the families of the dead journalists compensated for their loss and relocated. Sometimes generosity is more effective than threats." Fatima's hands trembled as she served the next course, but she forced herself to remain steady. These men were discussing murder and bribery with the casual indifference of planning a vacation. The most chilling moment came during dessert, when conversation turned to what they called operational security. "We can't afford another incident. Like the Al-Mansouri girl," the Lebanese businessman said, his voice low but carrying clearly to where Fatima stood, arranging serving plates. "Family involvement in operations creates unnecessary complications." Khalil's response was delivered with icy control. "My daughter was an idealistic child who didn't understand the complexities of international business. Her death was unfortunate, but necessary. I've learned from that mistake." The casual dismissal of his own daughter's murder made Fatima's vision blur with rage. She gripped the serving tray so tightly her knuckles went white. fighting the urge to scream at these monsters who spoke of dead children as business complications. But it was the next exchange that provided the evidence Dr. Nkem needed most. Phase 3 launches next month, Khalil continued. We've identified new mining sites in Ghana and Ivory Coast. The local governments have been properly motivated, and we've established the necessary aid organizations to provide cover for the operations. How many children are we talking about? The Nigerian official asked. Initially, about 3,000 across both sites. The beauty of the aid organization cover is that families voluntarily surrender their children, believing they're sending them to educational programs. Fatima's heart shattered. 3,000 more children, their parents deceived into handing them over to monsters who would work them to death in dangerous mines. As the evening wound down and guests departed with handshakes and promises of future cooperation, Fatima mechanically cleared dishes while her mind raced. She had everything Dr. Nkem needed: names, locations, timelines, and most damning of all, recorded audio of the entire dinner conversation on her phone, which she had set to record before serving began. But as she prepared to return to her quarters, Khalil appeared in the kitchen doorway. "You served well tonight," he said, his voice carrying an undertone that made her blood freeze. "Very professional, very discreet." "Thank you, sir." He stepped closer, his presence filling the small space with menace. "I hope you understand that discretion is not just appreciated, it's essential. People who work in this house and hear sensitive information must be absolutely trustworthy." "Of course, sir. I understand completely." "Good." His smile was cold, predatory, "because tomorrow I'm having a security consultant evaluate all household staff. Just routine, you understand. But it's important that everyone who works here has clean backgrounds and reliable loyalties." The threat was unmistakable. Khalil suspected something, and tomorrow would bring scrutiny that her false identity and carefully constructed background might not survive. As he walked away, Fatima realized her time had run out. She had gathered the evidence needed to expose his crimes, but now she was trapped in a house with a man who had casually ordered the deaths of journalists, activists, and even his own daughter. Tomorrow, she would either escape with the truth that could save thousands of children, or she would become another casualty in Khalil Al-Mansouri's long history of silencing inconvenient witnesses. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. Fatima didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat on her small bed with Amara's notebook open beside her, methodically uploading every piece of evidence to an encrypted cloud storage account that Dr. Nkem had provided. The audio recording from dinner, the photographs of documents, and detailed notes about everything she had witnessed, all of it moved silently through the darkness to servers in countries where Khalil's influence couldn't reach. At 4 a.m., she received a coded message through the Signal app. "Package received, preparing international response. Exit protocol activated. Car will be at service entrance at 6:15 a.m. during shift change. Blue sedan, license plate AUH 40471. Driver will ask about laundry delivery. Respond that the sheets need special care." 6 hours. She had 6 hours before the security consultant arrived. 6 hours to search for the additional evidence that Amara's notebook suggested was hidden throughout the house, and 6 hours to make her escape before Khalil discovered that his carefully guarded secrets had been exposed to the world. But leaving now meant abandoning the possibility of finding more evidence, more names, more details that could save additional children. The dinner conversation had revealed new locations, new timelines, but Amara's notes suggested there were comprehensive financial records hidden elsewhere in the house, documents that could unravel the entire international network. As dawn approached, Fatima made her decision. She would use her morning cleaning routine to search for the remaining evidence, then escape during the shift change. It was risky, but the potential to expose the full scope of Khalil's operations was worth the danger. She began her search in the most obvious place, Khalil's home office, which she had never been permitted to enter but could access using Layla's master key. The room was a study in controlled power. Multiple monitors displaying financial markets from around the world, walls lined with awards from humanitarian organizations that unknowingly legitimized his criminal enterprises, and a massive safe, hidden behind a painting of the Dubai skyline, but it was the computer that drew her attention. Still logged in from the previous night's work, the screen displayed email correspondences that made her blood run cold. Messages to and from government officials in 6 African countries, detailed shipping manifests for educational supplies that were clearly codes for something else, and most damaging of all, budget reports showing exactly how much money was being diverted from each children's aid organization. Working with desperate efficiency, Fatima photographed screen after screen of evidence. Financial transfers totaling hundreds of millions of dollars, lists of government officials receiving regular payments, schedules for educational facility inspections that corresponded with the dates children were being recruited for the mines. But the most devastating discovery was a folder labeled Insurance Files. Detailed dossiers on everyone involved in the network, including compromising information that Khalil used to ensure loyalty. Photos of officials accepting bribes, recorded conversations of illegal agreements, even evidence of personal indiscretions that could destroy careers and families. Among these files was one that made Fatima's hands shake. Layla Al-Mansouri, psychiatric treatment records. The documents revealed that Layla had attempted suicide twice after discovering her husband's role in their daughter's death, and that she was being kept medicated and under surveillance to prevent her from becoming a liability. The woman who had shown Fatima kindness, who tended her garden with such care, was as much a prisoner in this house as the children in the mines. A sound from downstairs interrupted her frantic documentation. Footsteps on marble, too early for Layla's usual morning routine. Khalil was awake, and from the urgency of his movement, something had changed overnight. Fatima quickly logged out of the computer and slipped back into the hallway, but she could hear voices now. Khalil speaking in rapid Arabic to someone over the phone. The tone was angry, agitated, suggesting that something had gone wrong. She made it back to the ground floor just as Khalil emerged from his private wing, still in his nightclothes, but fully alert. His eyes swept the main hall with predatory intensity before settling on her. "You're working early today," he observed, his voice carrying suspicion. "Mrs. Al-Mansouri asked me to prepare the main salon for cleaning before the security consultant arrives," Fatima replied, maintaining steady eye contact while her heart hammered against her ribs. "I see." He studied her for a long moment that felt like an eternity. "Tell me, what did you think of last night's dinner guests?" The question was a trap, designed to test whether she'd been listening to conversations she shouldn't have heard. "They seemed like very successful businessmen, sir, very polite." "Polite?" "Yes." His smile was cold. "And you heard nothing that concerned you? Nothing that might have been misunderstood by someone unfamiliar with international business?" "I was focused on serving properly, sir. I'm afraid I didn't pay attention to the conversations." Khalil stepped closer, his presence radiating menace. "That's fortunate. Because I've just learned that someone has been sharing confidential information about my business operations. Someone with access to very sensitive details." Fatima's blood turned to ice, but she forced her expression to remain confused and innocent. "That sounds very serious, sir." "It is. In fact, it's the kind of betrayal that has historically resulted in permanent solutions." His eyes never left her face as he delivered the threat. "The security consultant arriving today specializes in identifying internal threats. He's very thorough in his methods. The implication was clear. She was suspected, and the security consultant was likely someone who extracted information through methods that didn't leave survivors. "I should return to my duties," Fatima said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Yes, you should. And remember, loyalty is rewarded in this house, but betrayal—" He left the sentence hanging like a blade over her head. As Khalil retreated to his wing, Fatima realized her situation had become exponentially more dangerous. Somehow, he had learned about the leak, perhaps through contacts in international organizations, perhaps through surveillance she hadn't detected. Either way, her window for escape was closing rapidly. She had 40 minutes before the extraction, 40 minutes to search for the final pieces of evidence that Amara's notebook suggested were hidden in the family's private quarters. But accessing those areas now, with Khalil suspicious and alert, would be almost impossible. The solution came from an unexpected source. Layla appeared at the top of the main staircase, moving with the careful precision of someone heavily medicated. Her eyes, when they met Fatima's, held a clarity that suggested the morning's medication hadn't yet taken full effect. "Fatima," she called softly, "could you help me with something in my private study?" This was it. Access to the family quarters, provided by the one person in the house who might understand what Fatima was really doing. They climbed the stairs together in silence. But as they reached the upper landing, Layla suddenly gripped Fatima's arm with surprising strength. "I know what you found," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know about Amara's investigation, about the evidence she hid. I've been waiting 3 years for someone to be brave enough to finish what she started." Fatima's mind reeled. "You knew?" "I helped her hide it. The secret compartment in the formal living room was my idea. Khalil never goes there anymore. Too many memories of family gatherings we'll never have again." Tears began flowing down Layla's cheeks. "But there's more. Financial records, communication logs, everything needed to identify every child, every family, every government official involved." "Where?" Layla led her to a bedroom that had clearly belonged to Amara. Unlike the rest of the house, this room remained exactly as a teenager had left it. Books scattered on the desk, clothes hanging in the closet, photographs of friends pinned to a bulletin board. But Layla went directly to a bookshelf and removed a leather-bound volume of poetry. Inside, the pages had been cut out to create a hiding space containing multiple USB drives and a stack of printed documents. She documented everything, Layla said, pressing the drives into Fatima's hands. "Names, dates, locations, financial transfers, and I've been adding to it for 3 years, copying every document I could access, recording every conversation I could overhear." "Why didn't you—" "Because I'm a coward," Layla interrupted, her voice breaking. "Because he keeps me medicated and monitored, and because I know what he's capable of. But you're strong enough to do what I couldn't." The sound of vehicles arriving in the driveway below interrupted them. Through Amara's bedroom window, they could see 2 black SUVs disgorging men in dark suits, not security consultants, but the kind of operatives who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. "They're early," Layla breathed, her face going pale. "He must know." Fatima looked at her watch. 5:45 a.m. She had 30 minutes before her extraction, but the men downstairs would begin a systematic search immediately. There was no way she could reach the service entrance without being detected. "There's another way," Layla said urgently. "The service tunnel that connects to the pool house. Amara used it to sneak out when she was investigating. It exits near the back gate." As they heard footsteps on the main staircase, Layla grabbed Fatima's shoulders. "Promise me something. When this story breaks, when the world learns what he's done, tell them about the children in the photographs. Tell them their names if you can find them. They deserve to be remembered as more than just victims." "I promise," Fatima whispered. "And tell them Layla's voice broke completely. Tell them that Amara's mother finally found the courage to help finish her daughter's work. The footsteps were getting closer. Layla quickly showed Fatima to a hidden panel in Amara's closet that opened onto a narrow service corridor. As Fatima squeezed through the opening with the USB drives and documents clutched against her chest, she heard Layla call out in a shaky voice, "Khalil, is that you? I was just remembering Amara." The panel closed behind Fatima just as heavy. Footsteps entered the bedroom. She crawled through the cramped tunnel in darkness, guided only by faint light filtering through ventilation grates, while behind her she could hear muffled voices and the sounds of a room being systematically searched. 15 minutes later, she emerged from the pool house into the pre-dawn darkness, her phone buzzing with a message. "Blue sedan waiting, move now." As she ran toward the back gate, Fatima could hear shouting from the main house. They had discovered her absence, and the hunt was beginning. But clutched in her hands was evidence that would expose a network of corruption stretching across continents, save thousands of children, and finally bring justice for a brave young woman who had died trying to protect the innocent. The blue sedan's engine was already running as she reached the gate. Freedom was 50 meters away. But first, she had to survive the next 5 minutes without being caught by men who had killed to protect these secrets and would kill again without hesitation. The blue sedan's door slammed shut behind Fatima just as searchlights began sweeping. The Al-Mansouri compound. The driver, a compact woman with silver hair and alert eyes, didn't speak as she accelerated away from the mansion, but her professional calm radiated competence that helped steady Fatima's racing heart. "Dr. Sarah Chen, Transparency International Extraction Specialist," the woman said once they were several blocks away. "Your professor sends her regards. Are you injured?" "No, but they know. Khalil suspects everything." Fatima clutched the USB, drives and documents against her chest like a shield. "And there's something else. His wife has been helping. She's been gathering evidence for 3 years. Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose. "Layla Al-Mansouri? That's unexpected. We assumed she was complicit. She's a prisoner, just like the children in the mines. He keeps her medicated to prevent her from exposing him." Fatima's voice shook as she remembered Layla's broken expression. "She helped me escape, but she's still in there with those men." "We can't go back," Dr. Chen said firmly. "But we can make sure her sacrifice means something. What additional evidence?" "Did you recover?" As they drove through Dubai's awakening streets toward a safe house in the older part of the city, Fatima detailed everything she had found. The financial records, the government corruption files, the insurance dossiers, and most importantly, the comprehensive documentation that Amara and Layla had compiled over years of secret investigation. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Chen said, as she navigated through narrow alleyways. "We're talking about evidence that could bring down government officials in 6 countries, expose systematic child exploitation across West Africa, and reveal the largest aid money diversion scheme in modern history." They arrived at a modest apartment building that looked nothing like a safe house. But the moment they stepped inside, Fatima realized the ordinary exterior concealed sophisticated security systems and communication equipment that transformed the space into a high-tech command center. Dr. Adaora Nkem was waiting for them, along with 3 other people Fatima didn't recognize: a journalist from the BBC, a prosecutor from the International Criminal Court, and a cybersecurity specialist who was already preparing to analyze the USB drives. "Fatima," Dr. Nkem said, embracing her former student with tears in her eyes, "you've done something extraordinary, but now we need to work quickly. Once Al-Mansouri realizes the scope of what you've taken, he'll activate every resource he has to contain the damage." The next 6 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. The cybersecurity specialist confirmed that the USB drives contained over 50,000 documents, including financial records that trace stolen aid money through dozens of shell companies and offshore accounts. The BBC journalist began preparing a coordinated international story that would break simultaneously across multiple continents, preventing any single government from suppressing the information. But it was the ICC prosecutor who delivered the most shocking revelation as she reviewed Amara's original investigation notes. According to these documents, the operation has been running for 8 years, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. We're not talking about 3,000 children in the upcoming expansion. We're looking at an estimated 40,000 children who have already been processed through this system. Fatima felt the room spin around her. 40,000 children, stolen from their families under the guise of educational programs, forced to work in dangerous mining conditions, with many never returning home. The magnitude of suffering was beyond comprehension. Where are they now? She whispered. That's what we're going to find out, the prosecutor replied. Your evidence includes location data for 17 mining sites across 6 countries. We're coordinating with international law enforcement to conduct simultaneous raids beginning tomorrow morning. Dr. Nkem pulled up a secure video call connecting them to officials in Lagos, London, Geneva, and New York. Fatima watched in amazement as her evidence triggered a massive international response. Interpol alerts, emergency UN Security Council sessions, and coordination between human rights organizations she had only read about in newspapers. But their celebration was interrupted by urgent news from Dubai. Dr. Chen's contacts in local law enforcement reported that Layla Al-Mansouri had been found, dead in her garden, apparently from an overdose of her psychiatric medications. The official cause would be listed as suicide, but the timing left no doubt about what had really happened. He killed her, Fatima said, tears streaming down her face. She helped me escape and he killed her for it. Which means he knows exactly what you took, Dr. Chen said grimly, and he'll be mobilizing every resource to stop the story from breaking. As if summoned by her words, Dr. Chen's secure phone began buzzing with emergency alerts. Al-Mansouri's network was moving quickly. Government officials in Nigeria and Ghana were suddenly unavailable. Aid organizations were issuing statements about routine audits of their programs, and there were reports of mining sites being rapidly evacuated. They're destroying evidence, the cybersecurity specialist said, monitoring internet traffic from the various mining operations, servers being wiped, facilities being abandoned, workers being relocated. But something unexpected was happening. As well, news of the impending investigation had reached social media through channels they couldn't control, and families across West Africa were beginning to speak out. Parents who had sent their children to educational programs were sharing photographs and demanding information about their missing sons and daughters. The journalist showed them trending hashtags in multiple African languages. Where are our children? Udris Hussein, Sikhs, mining slaves, justice for Amara. What had begun as a carefully controlled evidence release was becoming a grassroots movement that couldn't be silenced. This is what Amara hoped for, Dr. Nkem said, watching the social media feeds. Not just justice through courts, but awareness that would make it impossible for this to happen again. By evening, the story was ready to break. The BBC would lead, with a comprehensive investigation, followed by coordinated reports from media outlets in 12 countries. The evidence would be released simultaneously to prevent any single government from suppressing the information, and international arrest warrants were being prepared for dozens of individuals, including Khalil Al-Mansouri. But as they finalized the release, Dr. Chen received a call that changed everything. It's Al-Mansouri, she said, looking at her phone. He wants to negotiate. The call was brief and chilling. Khalil's voice was calm, controlled, carrying the authority of a man accustomed to making problems disappear. "Dr. Chen, I believe you have some materials that belong to me. I'm prepared to offer a substantial financial settlement for their return, along with guaranteed safe passage for all parties involved." "We're not interested in negotiations," Dr. Chen replied. "Perhaps you should reconsider. The young woman who took those materials, Miss Okonkwo, has family in Lagos, doesn't she? A brother attending university? It would be unfortunate if his academic career were interrupted by unforeseen circumstances." The threat hung in the air like poison. Khalil was threatening Emeka, her younger brother who knew nothing about any of this. "You have 12 hours to consider my offer," Khalil continued. "After that, I can no longer guarantee the safety of anyone connected to this situation." When the call ended, the safe house fell silent. Everyone understood what they were facing: a man with resources spanning continents who had already demonstrated his willingness to kill family members to protect his secrets. "We can protect your brother," Dr. Nkem said immediately. "We have people in Lagos who can move him to safety within hours." "And after that?" Fatima asked. "How long can you protect him? How long can any of us hide from someone with Khalil's resources?" The answer was unspoken but clear. They couldn't. The only safety lay in exposure so complete that killing the witnesses would serve no purpose. "We accelerate the timeline," the ICC prosecutor decided. "Everything goes public in 6 hours instead of 12. Full simultaneous release, all evidence, all testimony. Once the story breaks globally, Al-Mansouri loses his ability to contain it through intimidation." As the team worked frantically to coordinate the accelerated release, Fatima sat alone for a moment with Amara's notebook. The young woman's final entries spoke of courage in the face of overwhelming evil, of the responsibility that came with knowledge of injustice. "I'm not brave enough to see this through alone," Amara had written, "but maybe someone who finds this will have the strength I lack. Maybe together we can save the children I couldn't protect." Fatima closed the notebook and rejoined the group. In 3 hours, the world would learn the truth about Khalil al-Mansouri's empire of exploitation. Children across Africa would begin their journey home to families who had thought them lost forever. And a young woman who had died trying to expose these crimes would finally see justice served. But first, they had to survive the next few hours, while one of the most dangerous men in the world used every resource at his disposal to silence them. Forever, the race between truth and violence was about to reach its climax, and the outcome would determine whether 40,000 missing children would ever see freedom again. At exactly 6 a.m. GMT, the story broke simultaneously across 23 countries. The BBC's headline read, "Stolen Childhood, How Billionaires. Empire Built Fortune on 40,000 Missing African Children." Within minutes, news outlets from CNN to Al Jazeera, from Nigerian Tribune to South African Broadcasting Corporation, were running the same devastating exposé. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and documented with a precision that made denial impossible. Fatima watched from the safe house as her months of careful observation transformed into a global earthquake that shook governments, corporations, and humanitarian organizations across 3 continents. The USB drives she had risked her life to obtain were yielding secrets that went far beyond even what she had imagined. "Social media is exploding," the cybersecurity specialist reported, monitoring global internet traffic. The hashtag #WhereAreOurChildren is trending in 47 countries. We're seeing spontaneous protests forming in Lagos, Accra, Johannesburg, and Abidjan. The BBC journalist was conducting live interviews with families who had seen their children's photographs in the leaked documents. Parents who had believed their sons and daughters were receiving education and training, only to discover they had been sold into mining slavery. The raw emotion of mothers recognizing their children in photographs taken at illegal mining sites was creating a human narrative that no amount of corporate spin could neutralize. But it was the financial revelations that were causing panic in government offices around the world. The documents showed a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of 6 African governments, with officials receiving millions in bribes to allow the mining operations to continue unchecked. Nigerian president calls emergency cabinet meeting, Dr. Chen announced, reading urgent updates on her secure phone. Ghana's mining minister has been arrested. Ivory Coast is claiming the documents are fabricated, but their telecommunications minister just resigned. The scale of the international response was unprecedented. Interpol had issued red notices for Khalil Al-Mansouri and 47 associates. The UN Security Council was convening an emergency session. Most critically, law enforcement teams in 6 countries were conducting simultaneous raids on mining facilities, aided by the precise location data from Amara's investigation. But the most powerful moment came when they received a video call from a rescue team in northern Nigeria. "We need Miss Okonkwo to see this," the team leader said, his voice thick with emotion. The camera panned across a mining compound that had been hastily abandoned just hours earlier. "We've found evidence of over 800 children at this site alone. Medical supplies, sleeping quarters, work schedules, everything documented, just like your evidence suggested." The real breakthrough came when they discovered children who hadn't been evacuated in time. The camera showed a group of young boys, aged between 8 and 14, huddled together in a concrete building. They were terrified, malnourished, and bore the physical marks of months or years of forced labor. "Can you tell us where you're from?" the rescue worker asked gently in Hausa. One boy, barely 10 years old, stepped forward. "My name is Ibrahim. I'm from Kano. My parents sent me to school in Dubai, but the men brought us here instead. They said if we tried to leave, they would hurt our families." Fatima burst into tears as she watched the screen. This was what Amara had died trying to expose. Children stolen from their families and trapped in a nightmare of exploitation, told that their own parents would be harmed if they tried to escape. "How many more sites are there?" she asked through her tears. 17 confirmed locations are being raided simultaneously, the ICC prosecutor replied. "Early reports suggest we're looking at recovering over 3,000 children in the first wave alone." But even as rescue operations proceeded, Khalil Al-Mansouri was not quietly accepting defeat. Reports were coming in of systematic destruction of evidence at facilities the rescue teams hadn't reached yet. Computers being destroyed, records being burned, and most troubling of all, signs that remaining children were being moved to unknown locations. "He's implementing what they call a scorched earth protocol," Dr. Chen explained grimly. "Rather than allow evidence to be recovered, they're destroying everything and relocating operations." The realization hit Fatima like a physical blow. While they were celebrating the exposure of his crimes, Khalil was potentially disappearing with thousands of children who might never be found. This fear was confirmed when Dr. Nkem received a call from her contacts in Ghana. 3 mining sites were found completely empty, she reported. Recent signs of occupancy, but no children, no workers, no documentation. "They evacuated everything before our teams arrived. The race against time was continuing even after the story had broken. For every child they rescued, others were being moved deeper into a network that spanned continents and had resources to adapt quickly to international pressure. But something unexpected was happening that gave them hope. The global exposure had triggered responses that went beyond official law enforcement. Families across West Africa were sharing information on social media, posting photographs of missing children and locations where they suspected mining operations might be hidden. Local communities were organizing search parties, and former workers at the mining sites were coming forward with information. "Look at this," the journalist said, showing them a video that had gone viral on WhatsApp. A group of mothers in rural Nigeria had surrounded a compound they suspected of housing missing children, demanding access and refusing to leave until authorities investigated. The grassroots response was creating pressure that couldn't be controlled or contained by traditional power structures. Every family that shared a story, every community that demanded answers, every former worker who provided information was contributing to a web of accountability that Khalil's resources couldn't simply buy or intimidate into silence. The afternoon brought news that changed everything. Khalil Al-Mansouri had been arrested at Dubai International Airport while attempting to board a private jet bound for a country with no extradition treaty. The arrest footage, broadcast globally, showed a man who no longer looked powerful or controlled, just tired and defeated, wearing handcuffs that marked the end of an empire built on children's suffering. But his arrest also triggered a flood of new revelations as governments and organizations rushed to distance themselves from the scandal. Aid organizations admitted to irregularities in their programs. Government officials resigned en masse. Corporate partners severed ties and launched their own investigations. The most significant development came from an unexpected source. Khalil's own business associates began cooperating with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. The key insurance files that Fatima had discovered, the blackmail material Khalil had used to ensure loyalty, became liabilities once their protector was in custody. 17 government officials have been arrested in the past 6 hours, the ICC prosecutor reported. "We're seeing a complete collapse of the network as everyone tries to save themselves." But the victory felt incomplete to Fatima as she watched evening news reports. Yes, the world knew the truth. Yes, rescues were ongoing. Yes, justice was beginning. But thousands of children remained missing, moved to locations that might never be found. That evening, as she sat alone processing the day's events, Fatima received an unexpected video call. It was Emeka, her brother, calling from Lagos where he had been moved to protective custody. "Sister, I've been watching the news," he said, his eyes wide with amazement and concern. "Is it true? Did you really expose all of this?" "I helped," Fatima said carefully. "But it was Amara who started it, and Layla who kept it going, and thousands of people who are finishing it. The whole campus is talking about you. Everyone is saying you're a hero." The word felt hollow. Heroes shouldn't feel the weight of thousands of children still missing. Heroes shouldn't wonder if they could have done more, moved faster, saved more lives. "I just did what needed to be done," she replied. "Well, what you did is giving hope to families who thought they'd never see their children again. There's a mother in our neighborhood, Mrs. Adamu. Her son was taken 2 years ago for a scholarship program. She saw his picture in one of the news reports today. Her boy is alive and he's coming home." That night, as reports continued to stream in from rescue operations across Africa, Fatima finally allowed herself to feel something beyond guilt and urgency. Not pride, the cost had been too high for that, but a quiet satisfaction that Amara's sacrifice had not been in vain. The evidence she had risked her life to obtain was bringing children home to families who had given up hope. The network that had operated in shadows for 8 years was crumbling under international scrutiny, and most importantly, the world was now watching, making it infinitely harder for such systematic exploitation to happen again. But even as she drifted toward sleep, Fatima knew her work was far from over. Somewhere, children were still trapped in conditions she could barely imagine, and tomorrow she would wake up ready to help find them, one revelation at a time. 6 months after the story broke, Fatima stood in the courtroom of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, watching as Khalil Al-Mansouri was sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes against humanity. The man who had once commanded empires with a gesture now sat diminished behind bulletproof glass, his empire reduced to ashes, and his legacy forever tied to the suffering of children. But this moment of justice felt incomplete without the presence of those who had made it possible. Amara's photograph sat prominently on the prosecutor's table, the young woman whose courage had started the investigation that brought them all here. Layla's death had been ruled a murder during the trial, adding another life sentence to Khalil's already overwhelming list of crimes. The defendant's systematic exploitation of vulnerable children across 6 nations represents one of the most heinous organized crimes of the modern era, the judge declared. The evidence presented by witness testimony, financial records, and documentation recovered through the investigation demonstrates a calculated effort to profit from human suffering on an unprecedented scale. Fatima testified for 3 days, walking the court through her discovery of the evidence, her documentation of conversations, and the moment she realized the full scope of what she had uncovered. But her testimony was only one voice in a chorus of survivors, rescued children, and families who had found the courage to speak truth to power. The trial revealed details that even Fatima hadn't known. The network had operated for 12 years, not 8, as originally believed. The total number of children exploited exceeded 60,000 across 17 countries. The amount of aid money diverted topped $800 million, funds that could have built schools, hospitals, and infrastructure for the very communities they had instead destroyed. But perhaps most importantly, the trial established legal precedents that would make similar operations infinitely more difficult to organize and sustain. New international protocols for monitoring aid organizations, mandatory transparency requirements for mining operations, and enhanced protections for whistleblowers all emerged from the evidence that began with Fatima's careful observations in a Dubai mansion. Following the sentencing, Fatima walked out of the courthouse into a crisp autumn afternoon in The Hague. The weight she had carried for months, the responsibility for thousands of lives, the guilt over those she couldn't save, the fear that had followed her across continents, finally began to lift. "How does it feel?" asked Rebecca Martinez, the BBC journalist who had become both friend and chronicler of Fatima's journey. The question was being broadcast live to millions of viewers around the world who had followed the story from its explosive beginning to this moment of justice. "It feels like Amara can finally rest," Fatima replied, choosing her words carefully. "And like the children who are going home to their families today can begin to heal." The rescue operations had continued for months after the initial raids. Working from Amara's comprehensive documentation and information provided by former network associates seeking reduced sentences, international teams had located and shut down 43 mining operations across 7 countries. Over 18,000 children had been rescued and reunited with their families, but the numbers didn't tell the complete story. The recovery process was complex, often heartbreaking, and would continue for years. Many children had been so young, when taken, that they didn't remember their original families. Others bore physical and psychological scars that would require extensive treatment. Some families had moved or died during the years their children were missing, leaving young survivors without clear paths home. This reality had driven Fatima to her next mission. Using a portion of the reward money she had received from multiple governments and human rights organizations, she had established the Amara Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting the long-term recovery and reintegration of rescued children. The foundation operated rehabilitation centers in 6 African countries, providing medical care, psychological support, and education for survivors. But more importantly, it worked to rebuild the trust between communities and aid organizations, ensuring that future humanitarian efforts would be transparent, accountable, and genuinely beneficial to the children they claim to serve. "We learned that good intentions aren't enough," Dr. Nkem explained during the Foundation's first annual report meeting. "Communities need to be partners in their own development, not passive recipients of programs designed by outsiders. The children we're serving taught us that the most important thing we can give them is agency over their own lives." The Foundation's work was informed by insights from the survivors themselves. Ibrahim, the 10-year-old boy whose testimony had moved the world during the rescue broadcasts, was now 13 and served on the Foundation's Youth Advisory Board. His perspective, along with that of dozens of other survivors, guided programs that prioritized dignity, choice, and community connection over traditional charity models. "People always want to know if we're angry," Ibrahim said during one Foundation event, speaking to an audience of donors and supporters. "But anger is heavy to carry. We're more interested in making sure this never happens to other children. That's why we tell our stories, not because we want pity, but because we want protection for the kids who come after us." The Foundation's impact extended beyond direct services to survivors. It had become a model for ethical humanitarian work, with other organizations adopting its transparency standards and community partnership approaches. The protocols developed through its work were being incorporated into international guidelines for child protection and aid distribution. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of Fatima's new life was the relationships she had built with the families whose children had been recovered. She maintained regular contact with over 200 families across 6 countries, celebrating graduations, supporting medical treatments, and simply being present for the ordinary moments of childhood that had been stolen and were now being reclaimed. Mrs. Adamu, the neighbor Emeka had mentioned during their video call, had become particularly close to Fatima. Her son David had been among the first children rescued, and his recovery had been remarkable. Now 15, he was excelling in school and planning to study international law with the goal of protecting other vulnerable children. "You gave me back my son," Mrs. Adamu had told Fatima during a visit to Lagos. "But more than that, you gave him back his future. That's a gift that changes not just our family, but generations to come." These connections reminded Fatima daily that her work wasn't just about exposing crimes or seeking justice. It was about restoring the fundamental human connections that exploitation had severed. Every child who returned to school, every family reunited around a dinner table, every community that regained trust in outside support, represented a victory that transcended legal proceedings or media coverage. The broader impact of the case continued to unfold globally. Mining regulations had been strengthened in dozens of countries. Aid transparency requirements had become standard practice. Most significantly, the case had empowered other whistleblowers and survivors to come forward with information about ongoing exploitation. In the year following Khalil's conviction, 17 other major trafficking and exploitation networks had been exposed, often by domestic workers, low-level employees, or community members who had learned from Fatima's example that ordinary people could challenge extraordinary power when armed with truth and courage. "What you started isn't just about one case," Dr. Chen told Fatima during a recent Foundation meeting. "You demonstrated that the most powerful weapon against systematic injustice is someone willing to pay attention and act on what they observe. That lesson is spreading. But for all the global recognition and systemic changes, Fatima's proudest moments remained intensely personal. A video call from a child she'd helped rescue, now learning to read in their native language. A letter from a mother whose daughter had been returned after 3 years of believing she was dead. A photograph from a Foundation-supported school, showing children playing together who had once worked side by side in dangerous mines. 2 years after walking into the Al-Mansouri mansion as a desperate job seeker, Fatima had testified before the United Nations, addressed the African Union, and been invited to speak at universities across the world. But she still remembered the exact moment when everything changed, standing in that secret room, holding documents that proved what she had only suspected, and realizing that some secrets were too important to keep. "People ask if I regret taking in that job," Fatima said during her final interview with Rebecca Martinez, conducted at one of the Foundation's centers in Lagos. Around them, children who had survived unimaginable trauma were playing, laughing, and planning futures that had once seemed impossible. "How could I regret the path that led to this?" she continued, gesturing toward a group of teenagers working together on a community garden project. "Yes, it was dangerous. Yes, people died. But look what emerged from their sacrifice. These children are free, their families are whole, and the world is watching to make sure this doesn't happen again." The final frame of the documentary showed Fatima teaching a literacy class at the Foundation's Lagos Center, surrounded by young survivors who were learning not just to read and write, but to see themselves as powerful advocates for justice. On the wall behind them hung a photograph of Amara Al-Mansouri, along with a quote from her investigation notes. "Every child deserves someone to fight for them, even if I can't be there to see justice done." In the end, justice had been served not through a single moment of courtroom drama, but through the daily work of rebuilding lives, strengthening communities, and ensuring that the children who had suffered the most were now positioned to protect others from similar fates. Fatima's discovery in a Dubai mansion had exposed one man's crimes. But the movement it sparked had revealed something far more powerful: the capacity of ordinary people to create extraordinary change when they choose. Courage over comfort, truth over silence, and justice over personal safety. The children were going home. The families were healing, and the world was watching. That, Fatima realized, was what victory looked like. 5 years have passed since Fatima first walked through the gates of the Al-Mansouri mansion, and the world she helped create looks fundamentally different from the one she entered that day. Standing before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, addressing representatives from 193 countries, Fatima holds in her hands a document that would have seemed impossible just years ago. The Universal Protocol for Child Protection in International Aid, signed by every major humanitarian organization and endorsed by governments across 6 continents. "When I cleaned houses for wealthy families," she begins, her voice carrying clearly through the assembly hall, "I learned that the most dangerous secrets are often hidden in plain sight. Today, because of protocols born from tragedy, such secrets can no longer survive in darkness." The protocol represents more than policy change. It embodies a fundamental shift in how the world approaches humanitarian work. Every aid program now requires community oversight, transparent financial reporting, and most critically, direct input from the children and families being served. The days of well-meaning outsiders designing programs without community partnership are over, but the document in Fatima's hands represents only part of the transformation. In the 5 years since the Al-Mansouri Network's exposure, the Amara Foundation has grown from a small organization serving rescued children into a global movement that has redefined what survivor empowerment looks like. The foundation now operates in 12 countries, but its approach has evolved beyond traditional service delivery. Instead of simply providing help to survivors, it trains survivors to become advocates, researchers, and leaders in their own communities. The young people who once worked in illegal mines now testify before Parliament, design protection programs, and train law enforcement officers to recognize signs of exploitation. Ibrahim, now 18, stands as the most visible example of this transformation. The frightened 10-year-old rescued from a Nigerian mining site has become one of Africa's most effective advocates for child protection. His testimony before the African Union led to the creation of the Continental Early Warning System for Child Trafficking, a network that has prevented the recruitment of an estimated 12,000 children in the past 2 years alone. People expect survivors to be broken, Ibrahim explains during a recent interview at Oxford University, where he is now studying international law on a full scholarship. But trauma can also create wisdom. We understand the signs, the tactics, the vulnerabilities that others miss. That knowledge is our power. The Foundation's survivor-led approach has inspired similar organizations worldwide. In Cambodia, survivors of sex trafficking now train border guards. In South America, former child laborers design corporate supply chain audits. The model pioneered with mining exploitation survivors has become a template for empowering all categories of trafficking survivors. Dr. Nkem, now the Foundation's international director, tracks these developments from the organization's headquarters in Lagos, a choice that reflects the Foundation's commitment to African leadership rather than Western charity models. What Fatima started wasn't just about exposing one criminal network, Dr. Nkem explains, reviewing impact reports that span continents. She demonstrated that effective protection requires authentic partnership with affected communities. That insight has revolutionized how we approach every form of exploitation. The ripple effects continue expanding in unexpected directions. The transparency protocols developed for mining operations have been adapted for agricultural supply chains, fishing industries, and textile manufacturing. Corporate giants that once operated with minimal oversight now face mandatory audits designed by survivors who understand exactly what exploitation looks like from the inside. But perhaps the most profound change has occurred in the realm of international law. The precedents established during Khalil's prosecution have been applied in dozens of subsequent cases, creating a body of jurisprudence that makes crimes against children exponentially more difficult to commit and far easier to prosecute. The International Criminal Court has established a permanent child protection unit that investigates systematic exploitation using methodologies developed from Amara's original research. The unit has opened investigations in 17 countries and achieved convictions in cases that would have been impossible to prosecute just years ago. Yet for all the institutional changes and legal victories, Fatima finds her greatest satisfaction in the quietly transformative moments that never make headlines. A former child laborer opening her own business with Foundation microfinance support. A family celebrating their son's university graduation after years of believing he was dead. A community successfully preventing recruiters from taking children by implementing early warning systems designed by survivors. These stories accumulate daily across the Foundation's programs, creating a counter-narrative to the exploitation that once seemed inevitable. Where there was once systematic victimization, there is now systematic empowerment. Where there was once silence enforced by fear, there is now testimony amplified by courage. The transformation is perhaps most visible in the mining communities, where the original crimes occurred. Towns that once existed in fear of recruiters now host regional conferences on child protection. Former mining sites have been converted into educational centers and healthcare facilities. Most remarkably, some of the same communities that lost children to exploitation are now training international observers who monitor mining operations worldwide. Mrs. Adamu, whose son David was among the first children rescued, has become a regional coordinator for the Foundation's family support programs. Her transformation from grieving mother to empowered advocate illustrates the broader changes occurring across affected communities. When David was taken, I felt powerless, She reflects during a foundation event in Abuja. Now I help other mothers understand that they have rights, that they can demand transparency, that their voices matter. No family should ever feel the helplessness we experienced. David himself, now 20 and studying engineering, represents the future the foundation works to create. He has designed water purification systems for remote communities, started a non-profit focused on educational technology, and regularly speaks to young people about recognizing and resisting exploitation. "I don't hide my story," he says during a recent TEDx talk in Lagos, "but I refuse to let that story define my limits. Every child who survives exploitation becomes proof that resilience is possible. We are not broken. We are experienced." The Foundation's approach has attracted international recognition, but also international imitation. Similar survivor-led organizations have emerged on every continent, each adapting the core principles to local contexts, while maintaining the central insight that affected communities must lead their own protection efforts. This network of survivor-led organizations now coordinates globally through annual conferences that bring together young advocates from dozens of countries. The sight of teenagers and young adults who survived various forms of exploitation collaborating on protection strategies represents a fundamental shift in how the world approaches human rights advocacy. As Fatima concludes her address to the UN General Assembly, she reflects on the journey that brought her to this moment. The frightened woman who once cleaned houses to survive has become a globally recognized expert on survivor empowerment and community-led protection, but the core insight that drives her work remains unchanged. Ordinary people who pay attention and choose courage can challenge extraordinary injustice. 5 years ago, I was invisible, she tells the assembled delegates. Today, I stand before you not because I'm exceptional, but because the children and families we serve taught me that everyone has the power to create change. The question is not whether ordinary people can challenge powerful systems, it is whether we will choose to do so. The protocol signed today will directly protect millions of children worldwide. The Foundation's programs will continue expanding to new regions and new forms of exploitation. The survivor-led movement will keep growing as more young people discover their power to transform their experiences into protection for others. But the deepest victory lies in something more fundamental. The knowledge that systematic exploitation requires systematic silence, and that silence becomes impossible when enough people choose to speak. The world Fatima helped create is one where victims become advocates, where survivors become leaders, and where the children who suffered the most are now positioned to protect those who come after them. In the end, the greatest secret Fatima discovered wasn't hidden in a Dubai mansion. It was the potential for ordinary courage to create extraordinary change. That secret, once revealed, could never be contained or controlled again. The children are safe, the families are strong, the future is theirs to shape, and the world is still watching, still learning, still changing, because one woman decided that some truths were too important to keep hidden. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.